Hello. And if you haven't figured it out by the intro, the computer we are going to be talking about today is this guy. This is an Amiga 1000. Amiga computers are kind of dear to my heart because these are the computers that I pretty much grew up on as a kid. My dad had an Amiga 500. I used it a lot. We actually did not have a PC compatible growing up. You'd think because of my attachment with DOS and stuff that we would have had an IBM PC compatible growing up, but no, we had an Amiga. I got into DOS because I had a lot of friends that had Tandy 1000s and DOS machines, and I interacted with them and have that nostalgia through that means. But really, it was the Amiga that I had at home, and I really love this machine and this line of computers, and for the time they were light years ahead of IBM PC compatibles. This is a model I did not have growing up. Like I said, I had the 500. This is the original Amiga. This is the 1000. This is the first one they came out with. This one's a little beat up. I got this recently at a garage sale for a really good price. It's a little beat up, but to my surprise, it completely works. Everything worked on it, even the floppy drive. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So the Amiga 1000 came out in 1985, and it is built around the Motorola 6800 CPU running at 7.159 megahertz. This thing was far more advanced as far as graphic and sound goes compared to IBM compatibles at the time, especially in graphics. It uses a custom chipset in there for graphics and sound, and it was just way better than what IBM's had at the time, the clones. Remember, sound cards weren't really a thing in 1985, and graphics, I believe we were still limited to like EGA at the time at the most. So I mean, this thing was just blowing everything out of the water. The Commodore Amiga wasn't as big in the United States, North America. It was a lot bigger in Europe than it was here, but it was still a pretty popular machine considering. So this Amiga 1000, this actually is maybe my least favorite model, and that really comes down to expandability. The Amiga 1000 is really hard to expand, like memory and hard drive wise compared to later Amigas. Now, on the side here, there is a little expansion port, and you can add on sidecars that attach to it, kind of like a TI-99 or a PC Junior. There's these little sidecars that attach to it, but some of them are hard drive controllers or added memory, but those things are rare and expensive. Luckily, this machine actually came with a pretty uncommon upgrade. It's an Insider 1 meg RAM. Now, generally these machines came with 256 KB of memory, RAM, and this little thing right here, I'm not going to take it off, but this detaches, and this, you can add memory. This is a little module, and you could add up to another additional 256K through these things, and these aren't too hard to find. So generally it was about 512 KB of RAM that these things would have, and that's okay, because a lot of, that's the base Amiga 500 came with 512 KB RAM, so a lot of games are kind of targeted to that, so that's pretty good. But this little thing here, the Insider 1 meg RAM, that was a really cool bonus when I picked this thing up. That's inside the machine here, and that adds a full 1 megabyte. So this machine right now has a full 1.5 megabytes roughly of memory. Not enough to run something like WHD Load, which is a program that lets you take games that normally you could only play by disc and put them on a hard drive, but it lets me play a lot of games, pretty much all the games except for the later ones that use AGA graphics. So yeah, like I said, this thing is very hard to expand inside, and when you do have upgrades that you do inside, some of it requires soldering. Like this Insider 1 meg RAM upgrade, it required a couple wires to be soldered. I kind of suck at soldering, so I'm glad, you know, I didn't have to do that. But yeah, it was probably an expensive upgrade at the time, and they probably had to take this into you know, a computer specialist or a computer store to do that upgrade. This is not really a plug-in, you know, plug-in mod system, unless you've got one of those nice side carts. I'm not going to open this up because it's just hard to open up inside, and there's a big RF metal shield. There's 100 screws to unscrew, but I will go to a photo that I took earlier when I did get in this thing, and I'll talk about it a little, but I'm not going to do that kind of like, you know, live. Cool thing is there's a little spot under here, and that's for the keyboard. I have the keyboard. Unfortunately, these original keyboards are kind of fragile, and they use kind of this telephone connector sort of thing. But this under here was kind of meant for the keyboard to hide under, which is kind of classy. And then you could just slide it out. So Amigas don't really use standard floppy drives. I'm a little unsure with the 1000, but I believe they're 800 kilobytes, and I think the later ones have higher capacity, but these are not compatible with, you know, IBM floppy drives. They're not the same thing exactly. All right, so here's the rear of the machine. There's the power socket for just a standard power cord right here. So we have this phone jack looking thing. You think that's a modem, but that's for the keyboard. Just parallel port for printer. We have a disk drive port for an external floppy disk drive. This is your serial port, and then we have these two. This is right and left stereo audio. This is for RGB video, and then we have this is actually for RF modulator, and this is composite video. So it's really nice to have these. If you don't have an RGB monitor, you can use these to hook up to just a regular TV, which works fine. Picture's obviously not going to be as good as RGB, you know, on an RGB color monitor, but it's nice to have the option to use composite. This is lacking on a lot of later Amiga models, so it's nice to have it built in. Okay, so you maybe look at this and like, RF modulator, that does not look like an RF, you know, coaxial cable would go in there. And you're right. I don't know why it's bizarrely over-engineered like that, but you need this thing, which is the Amiga TV Modulator. This is for specifically the Amiga 1000, and it just kind of hooks on like that, and then you put your coaxial cable in there. It's a little awkward. Again, this thing sticks out like a tumor.
It's not a tumor. Not a tumor.
So thankfully, I do have a Commodore RGB monitor, and I even have the original box for it too. So I just wanted to talk about these monitors for a minute. Now the monitor I have here is a Commodore 2002 monitor. I don't believe that is the original model that came with the Amiga 1000, but it's pretty close. This one here has a manufacture date of 1987, so it's fairly early, and the manual has a lot of pictures of it being hooked up to an Amiga 1000, so I think this is pretty close to what the original model would be like. Well, Commodore was kind of infamous for making like a million model numbers of monitors. I don't know why. A lot of them were virtually identical. It was just the model numbers that was different. It kind of reminds me of what Packard Bell did with their their desktop or their PCs, where there were virtually identical models with different names. Very confusing. But yeah, a lot of these Amiga monitors are really the same. The biggest difference you'll find is some of them have stereo sound and some of them have mono sound. The really nice thing I like about these monitors is they do have built-in sound. Unfortunately, the 2002 model only has mono sound built in, but there are, like the 1084S, I believe, has stereos. And actually I have a 1084S in this box. I'm not using it because it's not really working. I'm having some issues with the monitor, so I'm using this one. Which is fine. These monitors are great. They do digital RGB, they do analog RGB, and they also do composite, and they kind of an early form of S-video. There's 2 RCA jacks on the back of this monitor, and one it's for Luma and Chroma. So it's a weird version of S-video that uses 2 RCA jacks. So they're pretty good monitors, pretty good quality too. So here's the back of that Commodore 2002 monitor. We have the RGB port right here, and then next we have a switch, and this switches between analog and digital RGB. There's also, like, it says positive and negative. I'm not quite sure what that means. We have RCA jacks, we have audio for the mono audio built into this monitor. Then we have video, that's your composite, and then we have a red one labeled Chroma, and these two together is that weird sort of pseudo S-video I was talking about. There's also a switch on the front of this monitor to switch between the RGB composite, or the SEP as it's called, for the S-video sort of connection. So here's just a quick shot of the front of the Amiga with that module off. So that's where the module to add RAM on the front would go, and that's how it looks with it removed. Alright, and here's that Amiga 1000 with the cover removed. As you can see, it's pretty dusty, and there's the giant shield. And finally, here we go with the shield removed. Now you can see on the far left, that's the power supply, and on the far lower right is the floppy drive. Now if you notice, there's 2 daughter boards actually, but the one sort of lower on the board, that daughter board, like right above that, where that RAM module I was talking about goes, that's normal. I believe that's where some of the built-in RAM or memory goes, and that's for the that's only on the NTSC version as far as I know. Somehow they refined it on the PAL Amiga 1000s, and those lack the daughter board there. Now if you notice above that, there's another daughter board. It's the one that has a lot of chips on it. You'll see that row of chips. There's 2 rows of chips and then some larger chips on it. That's actually the Insider 1 meg memory expansion board. And you'll notice if you can see it, I don't know how well you can see, but there are a couple wires back and forth that are soldered there to the other daughter board. And that board actually fits right into the socket for the Motorola CPU, and then the Motorola CPU goes on top, on a socket on top of that expansion board. Alright, so here we go with it all set up over here. It's a nice little setup here. There are 2 joystick ports on the side. They're pretty much, I think they're DB8 or something. They're basically you know, Atari style ports. This is kind of a typical mouse that came with an Amiga. I think these are usually referred to as a tank mouse. They are a ball mouse, of course. I really like these joysticks. They're Wilco or Wicco joysticks. They're really well built. They have a good feel to them. There's a button on the top and on the base here, and you have a little, you have a switch that you can switch between the base button or the button up here. They're just really cool joysticks. I pick them up whenever I find them at Goodwill for a good price. They're not too rare. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at some games. Now, I'll just show you a couple games. I don't have a ton of games right now, and it's especially difficult because I can't have, this thing isn't souped up enough to run WHD load, so I actually have to do everything by floppy disk, and a lot of the disks I have are corrupt, they don't work, just a lot of old stuff, so we'll see what we can get running here. I will get to show you, though, the thing I dislike most about the Amiga 1000. In later Amigas, the Kickstart, which is basically, I guess that could kind of be considered the BIOS. It's kind of what you need to load any program. These were all in ROM. So, you know, you turn on the computer and you'd put your disk in, or you'd already have a disk in, and then it would go. This machine, they did not have the Kickstart in ROM. So you actually have to load Kickstart with a disk. So at minimum, there are 2 initial disk swaps. I mean, it's not too bad, but it's really annoying. And there are mods available that you can put in the ROM from a later Amiga, like an Amiga 500, where Kickstart is in the ROM. But unfortunately, with almost everything with the Amiga 1000. It's an expensive mod, and it requires soldering, and it's not, just just sock it in and it works. No, that would be too easy. No, with the Amiga 1000, virtually everything requires soldering, and it's a hassle. So that's one of the reasons I don't really like the Amiga 1000. I like the design, but it's limited initially, and it's just annoying to do any kind of little upgrades to it. And of course, the Amiga 1000 other perk is it gives a nice little jingle when you power it up. All right, so here we go. I have a selection of games here to try. So let's power this thing up. And the power switch is over on this side. And we should be greeted with it asking for the Kickstart disc. Takes a second. Alright, yeah, there we go. It wants the Amiga Kickstart. And if you hear that noise, that's very kind of distinctive of the Amiga. If you listen, that's the floppy drive. It's constantly searching for something being installed, or a floppy disk in the drive. It will automatically run it. Now, these are kind of like, in a way, they're very console-like. There's a lot of booter discs with a lot of Amigas. Like the later ones that have the Kickstart built in, you just put your game in the floppy drive and you power it on, and it will directly load up that game. Some of them actually run better that way than through the GUI. But so we're gonna. Oop, I messed up. That was Workbench. That's the operating system. We want the Kickstart. So I'm putting in Kickstart 1.3. Okay, so as we see now, it's asking for Workbench version 1.3. At this point, we can either load up Workbench, which is the graphical user interface, or we could put in a game. I believe some games need to be run through Workbench. Others actually need to be directly booted up. So we're going to put in Workbench right now. Alright, so here is Workbench. So, if you can see, there's my free memory. So like I said, generally this machine came with 256 KB of RAM. Adding another 256 through the front expansion is pretty easy, but thankfully this had the 1 meg internal, the insider third-party RAM expansion. So there's my free memory up there. And yeah, this is Workbench. There's later versions of Workbench, just like there's later versions of Windows. I'm pretty familiar with this version. Oh, my mouse isn't responding. Alright, well, apparently that mouse either didn't work, or I have a suspicion that maybe that was a Commodore 64 mouse. So I put this is another Commodore mouse. This is a little bit more modern looking, and this one works fine. So this is an Amiga mouse. But yeah, this is very sort of Windows-esque. You've got these little drop-down menus at the top. Maybe not Windows-esque. Maybe this is more sort of more like a Macintosh OS. But so this is test drive. There's that mono sound from the monitor. And I loaded this game through Workbench, so I've never played the IBM PC version of Test Drive, so I don't know graphically how this stacks up. So before I show you guys just a couple games on here, what I have sitting around, I just want to show you real quick how I'm going to capture this. Originally I was just going to point the camera at the screen. I don't really like doing that though. So what I'm going to do, thankfully the Amiga 1000 has as I showed you before, it has that composite output, and it can output RGB and composite at the same time. So what I'm doing is playing in RGB on the actual Amiga monitor here, and then back here, it's probably too dark to see it, I have a composite in the audio, and it's just trailing over to my Elgato capture device, all the way down to my capture computer, and then I'm capturing it in composite. So it's not going to look as great, obviously, because composite, but it's going to look better than just pointing the camera at the screen. So here's a couple games actually playing on the Amiga 1000.
Now keep in mind I've edited these a little bit for time, because disk swapping and loading takes some time. So the first game here is Marble Madness, and I love this game. This is a game I played a lot as a kid on my dad's Amiga. You also see in a second here the heartache of gaming on actual hardware. Now, as I stated earlier in a caption, I am looking into getting like an external Amiga floppy emulator to make things a lot easier on me. But I just don't want to do an internal one. I just think they destroy the look. I don't really have a problem with them as external devices though, for whatever reason. But yep, there we go. Read write error on the floppy, of course. Now the next game I have here is Into the Eagle's Nest. This is sort of reminds me of like a Gauntlet / original Wolfenstein game. I don't know, it's kind of fun. You'll realize a lot of these games I'm showing you are early games. Well, I think that's kind of fitting for the Amiga 1000 being the first Amiga. So we've got some earlier, 85 to 88 or 89-ish games. Obviously a prime target for a nuclear strike.
So I wish I had more variety of games to show you, or games that actually worked. A lot of those old discs, they were sitting in a guy's garage for probably 15 some odd years, so a lot of them didn't work. I only got a couple working for you. I really wish I could show you more of what this machine can do and what the Amiga's capable of. I get more games down the road, or pull some out of storage down the road. I'll try some other ones, or maybe when I do another model, I'll really show you what the Amiga can do. But my final verdict and opinion on the Amiga 1000, should you pick one up, it depends. If you're an Amiga collector, yes. You know, it's very significant being the original model, the original Amiga. If you just want to play games on the Amiga, well, if you don't have one already and you come across one for cheap at a garage sale or whatnot like I did, yes, my philosophy is any Amiga is better than no Amiga. But in my opinion, the Amiga 1000 is a little bit more hassle than it's worth. It looks nice, but you're probably better off with an Amiga 500, which is kind of the cut down model, but it's actually a lot easier to expand and use, in my opinion. You know, so I mean, I would really suggest going for a 500 or a 2000, or really any model other than the 1000. And a lot of people love the 1000, and it has a charm. I like it too, but in my opinion, it's just a little bit too much hassle. It's a little bit too hard to expand, and you know, it just has a little quirks that aren't really that great, like, you know, like the no kickstart in ROM thing. Plus the keyboard is really fragile and weird on this thing. Mine has a lot of issues. I actually need a replacement keyboard because they're just very fragile. So yeah, that's the Amiga 1000. I kind of have a love-hate with this model. It's my least favorite model. So thank you for watching. Hopefully I'll have some more videos in the future on different Amiga models. If you like this video, please subscribe. I've got more stuff coming. Thank you again. Hopefully in the future I can really make a video showing you what the Amiga can really do. Thanks again for watching.
If you like this video, please make a comment in the comments section or subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and check out some of my other videos for all kind of different computer related content, and even some vintage console stuff and media devices. Thanks again.